Tonight. The national debt has hit a staggering $14.25 trillion. That's an almost incomprehensible number for most, but it's about to become very real for members of Congress as they weigh whether to increase the ceiling on how much the country is legally able to borrow. It's the next big battle brewing in Washington, and my next guest believes that her party should stand its ground on this one and vote no. Republican Congresswoman Nan Hayworth represents New York's 19th district in the lower Hudson Valley, and she is joining us now from Middletown tonight. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Liz. Thank you.
So let's talk about this debt ceiling. I mean, there has been a report, or several reports actually, that, of course, the Republicans are not interested in raising the debt ceiling unless there is significant cuts that come along with it, spending cuts. Is that your position at this point?
That is my position as well. We have to act responsibly. We know what that means in terms of the realities of Treasury's necessity to issue debt. We are accumulating debt, as you mentioned, at the rate of about $5 billion a day. Meaning that we are spending beyond what we're bringing in revenues, and we do need to discipline the federal budget for the future. We have to stop spending money that future generations will never be able to pay.
Okay, but what does that mean in terms of
consumed by this debt?
In terms of spending cuts? In other words, how much cutting do you believe that we're going to have to do, particularly coming off a very huge budget battle in which the Republicans didn't get all the cuts that they wanted?
Right. Right. Well, let's look at it this way. The mathematics that, or arithmetic that any household would use when it's thinking about how to set a budget. This year, the federal government is on track to spend about $1.4 trillion more than it takes in revenues. And you're absolutely right. We did not get the cuts that we need to have if we wanted to come anywhere close to balancing the federal budget, meaning not spending more than we take in. If we wanted to have a balanced budget this year, we'd have to stop spending $1.4 trillion. That's not going to happen, as we all know, although we want to start coming into balance as rapidly as possible, which is why we passed Paul Ryan's budget on the Friday before we left for our constituent work weeks.
Hold on, before we get to that, because obviously there's some pretty controversial parts of Paul Ryan's proposal. I mean, there is cutting spending the only thing on the table when we start talking about the debt ceiling, because there's also been a report that maybe you have said that health care repeal might be, if you will, a trade if possible. In other words, would the Republicans be willing to raise the debt ceiling, which is what the Democrats have been asking for, a clean raise, a clean bill for just raising the ceiling, if in fact pieces of the health care repeal that the Republicans are seeking were put through? I can't imagine Obama would go along with it, but is that something you're looking to trade?
Well, we are certainly seeking to have spending cuts of substantial nature accompany any sort of decision actually to raise the debt ceiling, because again, the whole point is that we have to get back into balance, and that's the only responsible way to approach this massive debt. So to get back into balance, we're going to have to look at programs like the Affordable Care Act, which is a very, very expensive new obligation that the federal government has taken on, that Republicans like me feel will actually ill-serve the purpose, the very noble purpose for which it's intended. And yes, that is one of the ways in which we could start being responsible about our future, for the sake of, especially for the sake of the children who are going to be faced with this enormous burden as the years go by. It's not going to be too long before the debt service alone will dominate our federal budget in a couple of decades.
But does the S&P warning not concern you? I mean, the Democrats are spending this like, you know, okay, there's been a warning, the whole nation has been put on warning in terms of debt, and this indicates to the Democrats that it's time to raise the ceiling, or we will be defaulting all over the place. I mean, if you believe that these, you know, people who say that that's the case. The GOP doesn't agree that that's in fact what the S&P meant by issuing this warning. What's your interpretation of that?
Oh, Liz, I think you have to take the S&P warning very seriously. And I think what they're commenting on, obviously, is their projection for our fiscal future. The only way to grow an economy, the only way, is to put working capital back into Americans' pockets. It is not through growing the federal government. It is not through deficit spending. That is absolutely the wrong course. And I would say, certainly speaking for myself, but I think safely, I think I represent the view of most of my colleagues in the House Republican Conference, raising taxes will not accomplish our goals. It will damage us further. It has been a problem every time it's been tried by any government. There's a great study out of Harvard University Department of Economics. Alberto Alesina studied 20 national economies in crisis and found that the only ones who came out of the fiscal crisis well were the ones who either lowered taxes or reduced spending or did both. Raising taxes doesn't work.
Could we get back to the issue of health care for a second? I mean, obviously, health care was a flashpoint in the last election cycle. It was a huge issue, and Republicans like yourself talked about keeping promises, are now talking about keeping promises made during the campaign in terms of repealing health care reform, large pieces of the health care reform law. But again, now we're seeing some of your colleagues who voted yes on that Paul Ryan plan, which would dramatically change Medicare, according to the Democrats, end it as we know it, are now under a lot of pressure. You voted yes on that particular plan. And are you not concerned that senior citizens who are angry about this are going to take it out on you when they go to the polls next fall?
Well, senior citizens should be assured that for them and for anyone 55 and over, age 55 and over at the time of enactment of this budget, at the time at which it would become law, and I hope it will become law, but anybody 55 and over will not see a change in Medicare as it is currently administered. That gives people who are, in age 54 and under at least 10 years to prepare for making Medicare a more secure and stable program for the future. Right now, every new Medicare recipient who comes into the program, and we have 10,000 new recipients, new Medicare eligible age 65 or older baby boomers coming in every day now. On average, they've put through their history of payroll taxes, they've put about $110,000 into Medicare. But in fact, Medicare will spend $330,000 on average on their care. So clearly, we're not going to be able to afford that particular model for the future. And in fact, that's why in the Affordable Care Act, there's actually a 16-member board called the Independent Payment Advisory Board, or IPAB, which is intended to make sure that clamps are put on Medicare spending, which are intended to carry out those clamps.
Yeah, but this is clearly Congresswoman,
we're headed for spending reductions.
A flashpoint that we're seeing that the Democrats are, there are robocalls for some of your colleagues. There are accusations that, in fact, you're ending Medicare, quote, as we know it, essentially ending a program that will cause seniors to have to spend more for services that they already receive. I mean, voucher system is being thrown around. I mean, I know it's become enormously political at this point, but if it looks like that the president's going to dig in on this, I mean, how far is the GOP willing to go in terms of yet another battle that we've seen, like the one that we just saw, in fact, that almost shut down the government?
Right. Liz, it's about being responsible, it's about having common sense, and it's about having the courage to face facts. And the American people need the facts. And the facts are that Medicare, as we know it, will not be sustained for the future because of what I just mentioned. Medicare spends far more than it takes in payroll contributions. So while the future of the current form of Medicare is not going to change for those who are 55 and over, so current seniors will have Medicare as they do know it. But for all of us headed into the future, Medicare cannot continue as current seniors know it in exactly that form. The Affordable Care Act said the same thing. The Affordable Care Act actually took $500 billion out of Medicare as we know it to expend on other aspects of the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act, which President Obama signed into law, and in fact, to my knowledge, he was one of the architects of it, in essence, in spirit, if not in fact, changed Medicare as seniors know it. So it's dishonest and manipulative to suggest that somehow Republicans in the House conference are endeavoring to take something away from seniors. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are endeavoring to give seniors into the future the power to do what they know best in their own lives. So by a premium support program, which is what we have now as members of Congress. I personally have my old insurance, but members of Congress have a program that's been widely praised that provides premium support and lets them choose among an array of approved insurance programs, and that's what Medicare would do.
I'm sorry, we're almost out of time, but I'm curious. You kept your own insurance and didn't opt for the congressional one, the one that you're now asking that seniors essentially to buy into the similar model. Why was that?
Well, not because it's a bad program at all, but simply because actually I'm saving taxpayers some dollars by continuing my old insurance, which was a very cost-effective thing to do.
I see. Okay, cool. Well, thanks, Congresswoman. I appreciate your time, and it's good to talk with you. Hopefully we'll catch up with you again, and thanks for being with us.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Liz.